So let's start at the very beginning. How did the three of you meet, and how was the idea of the untold stories of Indian women's football born?
So I think Aditya, for Mits and I, we played the Karnataka Women's League. We've been playing it for the last about 5 years. We were on opposite, actually I would say rival teams. Then about 3-4 years into our playing careers, we met at a Tuesday night pickup game, which is organized by Sisters in Sweat every Tuesday, who Mithila was working with at the time. So we started chatting, and that was I used that time in Sisters in Sweat largely to convince Mithila to move to my football club, which is Misaka. And I think after a lot of convincing, she made the move. And then I think friendship has grown since then. Very similarly with Devika, we also met at a Tuesday night pickup game at Sisters in Sweat. So I think that's sort of been the common between three of us. I knew that she was, a video editor, etc. So approached her, and thankfully she was willing to join the project.
Yeah, I think pretty much what you said. So I think when Tani decided to do something in her sabbatical because she needs to keep herself busy, the Untold story sort of came up, and she interviewed one of our teammates, Diana. After which she was extremely excited about the story that came. Told me about it, and we started working on it together after. Then we needed an editor, and Tani had approached Devika. And I've known Devika for a while now through sisters.
I genuinely have nothing to add to that. They summed it up. I think Tuesday night football has been the common denominator for us, and it's
I
a
think
fun non-training full game session. So you just get to play and have a midweek runabout.
I think to summarize three things: Paul, Sisters in Sweat, and Misaka. These three things in common.
So while starting, did you guys have any particular vision or goal for the series?
So I think we didn't really go into it with, let's say, creating an impact or anything like that. We just wanted to tell real stories of players who we've seen pretty much all through our lives in different scenarios, played with them, experienced the sport with them, but there's such amazing stories with absolutely crazy backgrounds, and for them to overcome that and come in and play was still inspiring to hear. So highlighting the stories was always the first thing.
Yeah, so I'll add to what Mithila said. I have known person in the first story, Diana, for the last 2 years. So played with her across 2 seasons. And in that time, I've gotten to know her as a person, and she was willing to share her story, which if everyone sees the first episode is a tough story. When I just interviewed her, like Mithila said, I was on a sabbatical at that time. I was thinking about doing something in media. Interviewed her on a whim in the hostel that they were staying at, and was just absolutely blown away by what all she had been through, and how football had sort of been her solace of sorts, and it's kept her going. And that's when I realized that stories like this need to be told, especially because I and Mithila have access to these players, given that we play with them, and we're also, I think, the captain, vice captain of our teams, right? So there is that rapport, that trust that is built between us and the players, and they're willing to talk to us and willing to open up to us, right? So that accessibility is something that we wanted to use and put the stories out there. And then as I thought about it, I realized Diana's story made me sort of go and interview a couple other players who I also felt had interesting, diverse backgrounds. And I realized there are so many diverse stories within the team. And since we have access to these players, they seem to be willing to talk to us, to open up. Just decided to sort of make it a series, and then got Touchwood, got Mithila and Devika, an amazing team on board.
Question for Mithila and Tarini. While shooting the series, did you face any particular hurdles, or did you guys have any issues with the players opening up to you? Was there any hesitancy?
So I think there wasn't an outright hesitancy in our. Of course, initially the girls did have questions in terms of where it's going to be put up and all of that. But I think because the comfort level was already established, they did trust us to do the best for their story. So there wasn't too much of a hesitancy from any of them.
What has been the response from the industry? Have more people reached out to you wanting to share their stories?
So I think we've gotten quite a good response from across the women's footballing industry, I would say, in the country. I think a lot of top coaches have reached out, even offering help for some of our players. I think overall they could relate a lot to the stories that were put out, and they knew the kind of struggles that their teammates have gone through. So there's a huge amount of relatability. Couple of players did reach out. I wouldn't say just players, even coaches reaching out, not necessarily for for an untold story of their own, but they did have an experience in the industry that they wanted to share with us. So that, yes, that did happen.
I think this is a story or a series by the players for the players. So I think within each of the stories, there was a certain section of the industry that related to it, and we could sense that from the messages that we were receiving, right? Because I think, like we said, in Indian women's football, it runs on passion. Anybody and everybody who's in it, right? Whether it's club owners, whether it's the players, whether it's the coaching staff, they have given up something in order to be there. It's mostly just for the joy of playing the sport and competing, rather than any, say, monetary returns or fame or any of that, right? So that common struggle, that common passion, I think, that ran through these six stories was something that the audience or the industry related to. This is from the perspective of people within the sporting industry. I think, Dave's, you can probably give another perspective.
Yeah, my perspective was, well, everyone I met and showed the series to responded positively. I think that it's well known that Indian women's football is not well known. So I think that our fifth episode summed it up really well, where Imtiaz sir said, "Women's football, do they actually play?" That's the response he's got in the past with regard to his club Basaka. But I think that was also the response of a lot of people whom I spoke to about the series. They didn't know that there was an Indian Women's League. They didn't know that there were international players coming into India. They didn't know how big but yet not in the spotlight the scene was. And they did know that there was a struggle, but I think these episodes made, without any frills, just showing the stories, kind of help people realize how personal the stories are, that these are real people going through real journeys. We had a good varied kind of group of people that we interviewed. So the response I got was people realizing that people from all walks of life are going through these kinds of journeys, and they wanted to see more. Everyone I spoke to wanted to see more.
The next question is for Devika. As someone who's not from a sporting background, when you got involved with the series, was there anything in particular you wanted to highlight through your work?
And this is off the top of my head. What took me by surprise was just the ease with which everyone shared their story. I do come from a documentary background, so I have some amount of experience with people sharing personal things on camera. But I think that I had a front row seat to seeing how vulnerable each of our subjects were willing to be on camera, and with Mithila and Tarini. And as you said earlier, that's because they are teammates first, and that rapport starts on the field. But I think every episode we filmed, the comfort level between everyone did take me by surprise.
And also, follow-up question to the same, to the previous one. Is there something that took you by surprise, something you didn't expect while shooting the series?
I don't think I had a specific angle, because before the episodes, the three of us were quite aligned on the outcome of the episode. And there was a significant amount of research that went into the pre-production before we actually filmed. The planning of the questions, the direction that each interview wanted to take. So I didn't have a specific direction that I wanted to take. I'd say the direction of the whole interview was shaped by all our thoughts.
This one's for Devika again. What are your views on the coverage of Indian women's football by the Indian media, and where do you think we can do better?
My thoughts are evolving on this. The more I've gotten involved with this project, the more I have been looking at sports portals and Indian sports portals myself. So this thing has worked both ways, because I wasn't looking at sports portals as much. I think that, first of all, what really irritates me is that whenever there's an article or a story or anything, there's always a men's headliner followed by the women. I saw that I see that regularly, and I just think the entire tone for women's football needs to change. Even with the use of language, when you talk about, for example, if I were to talk about Mithila, you'd say, "Oh, she's a woman footballer." No, just say a footballer. You'd never say, "Oh, someone is a man footballer." I think there are a lot of portals I've been exposed to over the last few months that are doing a fantastic job of reporting and bringing light to the issues that are faced with everything from like gender-based wage gaps to the issues that women specifically face when they go on tournaments, etc. But I think there can be so much more, not just from the Indian but the international fraternity.
This one's for Tarini and Mithila. While shooting the series, was there any particular issue which you guys came across which was common for most of the footballers? And if so, how do you think we should go about tackling these issues?
I mean, I think one of the most common struggles that all Indian women footballers face is the lack of a calendar or a structure. So I think if you see most of the people's responses, they say that I play for about 2 to 3 months, and then the rest of the time during the year I do what I can. And depending on how their education levels are, or how what kind of job they have, what they do in this rest of the year is very ambiguous. It's very unpredictable also, and it's something that people seek out on their own. So that unpredictability in the calendar is a very common struggle all of us face.
I think she summed it up, Aditya. I mean, that I firmly believe that's sort of the major roadblock here. Yeah.
Question for Tarini. You're someone who has job alongside playing for Misaka, which is looked upon as a luxury by, I guess, most people in the industry. Can you speak to us about the balance that's needed and also the general issue that girls need to, have like a second job to sustain themselves whilst being able to follow their passion, and how we can tackle these issues?
So Aditya, I think people like me, right? So I am 27, and even Mithila, who's 25. Our football careers from a professional standpoint or semi-professional standpoint only started about 4 years ago. That's because the leagues in India for women, right, only started 4 5 years ago. So by the time I started playing quote unquote professionally, I was 22, 23. I was already working. I didn't have a choice, right? So for me, this was living out the chance to be able to live out my passion or our passions once I was comfortably settled into a job. So I had no other choice. I absolutely love this sport, can't stay away from it. So I just make it work. Like, it's difficult for me also in terms of the balance, especially during season when matches are during weekdays or practice timings can be during work hours. It's a balancing act, and Touchwood, my club Misaka, has been very, very supportive on this front. So I love it and I make it happen. But I know and I also have the backing from my family, right, to make it happen. I know not everyone has that support, but I will tell you that now when I look at, say, the 16, 17, 18-year-olds who are getting to the sport, they have a lot more avenues to play professionally, and especially getting in match time. So you have the state leagues, which are 2 3 months, then you have the IWL, which is another 2 3 months. The AIFF is planning to add another layer called the IWL2, which will give people another 2 3 months of playing time. So I'm seeing the younger footballers getting more professional playing time in a calendar year. Maybe they're getting 6 to 7 months of playing time now, vis-a-vis say 1 to 2 months, which was the case a couple of years ago. Also, salaries are slowly and steadily. I still don't think it's something that you can sustain on at least for the next 3 to 4 years, but slowly and steadily you are seeing more of the clubs playing players, and the salaries are slowly and steadily increasing. So I think that it's definitely much, much better than it was 5 years ago, where it was just the grassroots was just about starting in India and Karnataka. It's grown a lot in these 5 years, and I think only onwards and upwards from here. But I would say that the girls that are getting into it now, the 16, 17-year-olds, they're lucky because they can actually start their sort of professional careers when they should, which is at a younger age.
This question's for all three of you. What were your learnings from the series?
I have never used Instagram in my life before, and I got Instagram for the purpose of this project. And Mithila has had to spend hours just teaching me how to use Instagram. By the way, as in, even though it was a collaboration, it was mostly Mithila that was uploading from my account. So the introduction to the world of social media and media in general, I think that was a huge learning curve for me. That said, I mean, I have faith in why I didn't use Instagram, because I think after this project I'm off of it again. Yeah.
Yeah, just it was too many hours of building patience teaching Tani how to use Instagram. But otherwise, I think one of my key takeaways, which I actually found slightly surprising, is that initially when I got into this, I didn't expect the players that we spoke to be as open and honest about their answers. I didn't expect that, and that caught me off guard. And it was a great sign because it was a sign of all the girls wanting their stories to be told, and that was a huge eye opener for me because initially it was a thought of players just coming in whenever they can, doing their bit, and then heading back in, right? But when you truly understand that, irrespective of their backgrounds and journeys, players really do want their stories to be heard. And uh, yeah, it was fun doing that, and awesome revelation on that side. Gives me a lot of faith in the industry actually, because I think I truly see a growth trajectory for women's football in India.
It was actually just going back to the kind of grassroots of storytelling. And it was a relearning because we shot this series over just a few weeks during the training camp that was held in Bangalore by Masaka before the girls went off to the IWL in Gujarat. And so this automatically limited our time that we could spend both planning and shooting. We also didn't really use the extra footage that we used in all the films was mostly archive footage that was put together from the photos provided either during matches or that the girls could provide us with. And Tarini and Mithila know this actually. This was my biggest gripe on the whole in the whole process, that we didn't have any kind of other footage that you'd normally do. You'd normally, when you're doing any kind of shoot, you have the interview, but you have a lot of supporting footage that you've gone and shot. And for me, this entire my biggest relearning was going back to how to tell the story with just the person, just the raw person, the story, using several supporting bits of media that you could have, but putting out an engaging. The Instagram audience is harsh. Okay, if they don't like it within like 60 seconds, you're done. They will just scroll. So as a person who is putting this together, just from an editing standpoint, trying to hold people's attention with just the story, crafting it that way, and every episode, the people I spoke to just listened question after question. So I think that was my biggest thing, going back to how to tell a story without the frills of modern day filmmaking. We shot everything on an iPhone and a tripod and one single mic connected to the phone. That was it. Anyone, I know the iPhone does wonders these days, but I was incredibly pleased with how little we used to get such a great output.
And what were your personal favorite episodes and what makes it so?
Mine definitely is Diana's. I think Tani usually uses this word to describe it. It's very poetic, and I completely agree because I think her story was beyond what anything I've heard and what she's overcome. So my personal favorite is Diana.
Yeah, so concur with you there. It's absolute soft spot for the first episode. So known Diana, like I said, for 1 to 2 years, and just a lovely person and the kind of warmth that she has. Something that I always knew that she had, but when I actually interviewed her informally for the first time, it was just poetic, some of the things that she said, and it was very important for me to capture that very carefully. Had a lot, I think it was one of those moments that had a lot of clarity in terms of how we wanted to tell her story, because it was the first one and it was just very, very raw, very, very poetic. So yeah, soft spot for the first one, that's for sure.
I'd also say the first one actually. There are things that I enjoy about each episode. I loved that we were able to interview Mohammed Shoaib and Mohammed Imtiaz to get the very unusual perspective of what it's like for two men to be running a women's club. I think we've had a lot of um, women. There are a lot of stories out there in general, but this was a really unique perspective. That said, as Mithila and Tarini said, Diana's story really was a story that highlighted a lot of her vulnerabilities and that she was so open in sharing them with us, and didn't ask, none of our interviewees asked us to cut anything out. They trusted us to show their story in, and didn't have, we showed it to them before we aired it, and none of them wanted anything changed. But Diana really opened herself up to us, and it was the first interview, so that's special.
Yes, I think as you guys are talking, like it takes me back because at that point in time it was just an idea, right? But I think as we worked together as well through the first story, we realized that we worked well together in a team, and we really enjoyed, I think, the process of making the first one, and then that's when we decided, or rather, it gave us the belief that we could actually make a series out of it. I think after the first one came out.
The responses also gave us the belief that we could make a series, because I think the response to that first episode, once people understood what we were trying to do, was at least for me very motivating.
Do you guys have plans for further series?
Sure, I think we have talked about a season two between ourselves, but all of this again is just in the ideation stage for us right now. What we were potentially considering is, so Mithila and I just finished playing the IWL, and in the IWL you essentially have 5-6 teams that stay together within the same building, and then you sort of see each other during meal time. And during those meal times itself, whatever interaction or observations that we have of the players, we realize that hey, there's probably like 40 more stories out there within this room itself. Right, so what we might do is open it up to players beyond Misaka, and maybe just interesting stories across clubs, the people that we've come across and people that we've met. So that's what we're considering for season 2, but it's in the ideation phase.
And finally, to wrap things up, when you guys started the series, you guys obviously had a vision which we spoke about earlier. Do you see that after a season?
Yeah, 100%. I think I feel extremely positively about the series and about the kind of people that have reached out to us and told us how much they like it as well. So 100% positive about it, and have a good. I've been getting good feelings from the series itself. So yeah, I think I definitely feel we've created a good impact with it. Without necessarily, we knew that we wanted to showcase these stories. The output of it is something we didn't discuss. So glad to see the kind of response it's gotten and the positive reach that it's gotten.
Yeah, so adding on, I think as she said, there was no clear cut intent to necessarily have a positive impact or anything of that sort. But along the journey, we did have people from the industry, coaches, etc., reach out to us and ask us whether they could help the players in any way possible. Right, that's a nice outcome. The second thing I think was that since we had access to these players, and you can only sort of showcase these stories and have these players talk that the way that we did because we have that access, the realness and the rawness of it, and just having people relate to the stories, feel something in that moment, I think that was enough, at least for me personally.
That's great. I'm sure, like, along with me, like all of the other followers of your series are looking forward to season 2 with more episodes, more stories. Just want to say thank you to all of you for coming today and taking time out and speaking about this. I think it's very important that the entire idea of like giving spotlight to these stories and putting them out there so more and more people are aware of this. So there are steps being taken. So thank you so much for coming today and giving your time. It was
Thank you for having us. I'd say an outcome of this series is being on platforms like these to actually share these stories even more. So thanks for doing this.
Yeah, thanks, Aditya. Thank you for having us.